want to move down just a little more. Okay, so all through Texas woods, if you spend any time going through there, you've probably encountered this thorny, annoying vine. So it's Smilax family. It's in Smilax family. So Greenbriar, catbriar, wait a minute vine, blasphemy vine. You start swearing when you get tangled up into it. But it's the thorny vine that goes in the trees, climbing up. So different ways we can tell that it is a member of the Smilax family, which is important because Smilaxes have a number of edible parts. First, let me snip off a section here. So if we look at the leaves, and I'll pass these around in a minute. I'll just pass it around. You know what? I can move them. Okay, very, very thorny. So be careful how you take it. So we talked about different leaf vein patterns.
I got tangled up.
And I mentioned there's parallel, there's pinnate, and there's palmate. So these leaves are what we call palmate. So palmate means think fingers from the palm of a hand. So again, in most people's mind, the traditional leaf has one vein and the other veins come off it. In this case, it has multiple thick veins that come from the base of the leaf out to the edge, and then smaller veins will come off it. So with the parallel, they're all just lined up. With palmate, it's like fingers coming off the palm of a hand, and then smaller veins coming off the edges of those veins. And then pinnate, just simple, and we'll talk about pinnate when we talk about the tree on the other side. Okay, so we have palmate vein structures, especially easy to see. There's going to be, in this case, one of the veins is going to be fairly thick in the center, but then there's still going to be other veins running from the base out to the edge of the leaf. That's one thing. Let me get some more. If you were looking carefully at the base of the leaf, you'll see that there are two tendrils. That's one of the other structural features. At the base of each leaf, there are two small tendrils coming off the base of the leaf. Of course, the thorns. The thorns are a good one. And then, right now, we have the berries.
Oh, yeah, watch that.
Through here, you'll see we have these clusters of small black berries. So this is a fall type thing. So all parts of this plant are edible. Most parts aren't all that good. Really what you want are just the tender ends of the vines. You want to follow the vines to the very end. And on a little one like this, it's going to be small, but it's going to taste like little thin asparagus. The deeper you go into the woods, the bigger you'll find these vines. You'll find vines as thick around as my thumb. Those are the ones you really want. Because when you pull those down out of the trees, the ends of them, you'll get like an 8-inch chunk that tastes just like asparagus, but lacks the sulfide chemicals that makes you smell funky. Like asparagus for dating people. So, and again, it's available all year round. Right now, in the fall, we have the berries. The berries are edible, but frankly, they remind me of bubble gum someone else has chewed. There's no flavor. They're just this rubbery, gooey thing. If you split it open, it's like a black skin over this clear, jello, silly putty type stuff. Chew, 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 nothing happens, and it tastes, no real taste. Usually you just spit it out. But it's edible. Not a lot of calories or anything like that for humans. Animals love them. Deer, birds, porcupines, things you can eat that taste way better than the Greenbriar itself. This particular one, this is called catbriar, with its kind of very funky shaped leaf. It has kind of that spade shaped leaf with the bulb at the bottom, kind of goes narrow. In the summer it will be very spotted. You'll see the leaves have white spots on them. If you were to dig these tubers up, because these grew from tubers, they were the source of sarsaparilla. So there's sassafras, which is a tree, and sarsaparilla, which is the root of the smilax. So the best one is found down in Mexico. Up here, this is the second best one if you want to make root beer. The tubers, there'll be a lot of them, and it's a pain to dig up, so I'm not going to do it. Because they grow in chunks, and then the tubers will have tubers growing off it, and those tubers will have tubers growing off it, and it will have thick vines, thick roots running through everything, so it's a lot of work. And when you get these tubers out of the ground, it's not like the wine cups. The wine cups are 100% starch, wonderful edibles like a potato. These are about 30% starch, 70% wood fiber. So it's like a 2x4 with delusions of potato. So, but starch is calories, calories is life, so it was worth the effort for the Native Americans to collect them. So they basically had two methods of getting the calories from these big tuberous roots. Kind of the slow method and the really slow method. So the slow method is you dig up the roots, build a fire over them, and slow roast them for about 3 days. You know, like you're baking a potato, but you're baking it longer. Because starch is a bunch of sugar molecules. So we got a sugar molecule, link a bunch of sugar molecules together. I wish I had like 12 hands. You got starch. The body doesn't digest starch very well. It can, but it's slow. It much prefers sugar. Well, when you subject starch to heat, and mainly heat, and there's moisture present, it starts breaking those bonds, so you get individual sugar molecules. So after about 3 days of slow roasting them, they would dig them up, mash them into pieces, and then suck on them like sugar, and suck the sugar out of it. Sugar cane is still way higher, but there's enough in there that made it worthwhile. So that's the slow method, because it takes 3 days. The slower method is you dig it up, you slice it into potato chip sized slices, which is really hard with a stone knife. Again, I think just smashing it between two rocks works better. But you want to break it up, break those fibers up, and then set it in the sunlight and let it dry for about 3 days. The fibers shrink, and then you can actually see the granules of starch on the fibers. So then they would get a big clay bowl filled with water and start scraping the starch off and separating the starch from the fiber. The starch sinks to the bottom, the fiber floats, they pour off the water with the fiber, keeping this basically flour water paste, library paste, poi type stuff there in the bowl. They would then have frames that they'd carve out of wood, cotton wood, put it in there, dry it into blocks, and then when they were making a soup or a stew, they would break it up and mix it in as a flour, as a thickening agent to thicken up the stew, and also add calories to it. Certain cultures also figured out spit beer. So we're talking science here again, and alcohol. Big shock. So we're talking about breaking the starch into sugar. So like with the cedar trees, the yeast can react with the sugar in the berries to produce ethanol. The yeast can't eat starch. Starch is too big. It needs it broken into sugar. Well, in your mouth, you have enzymes. In your saliva, you have enzymes whose purpose is to break starch into sugar. If you're really bored someday, pop a piece of white bread in your mouth and just hold it there. And after a while, it's going to start tasting sweet, because the saliva is breaking down the starches, releasing the sugars, and your tongue is registering it as sugar. Then it's like, oh, cool, he was right. Boy, he must have no life whatsoever. But anyway, so a lot of cultures figured out that if you mix your saliva with starchy foods, walk away for several days, let the natural yeast in the air come in there, it reacts, forms an alcohol, 3 to 5% alcohol, and they make spit beer. There's this misconception that Native Americans didn't know about alcohol, and so they were highly susceptible to it. They all made beer or fermented something, that they never got above like 5%. So they were not used to the distilled spirits. So they can handle beer fine. It's when they started going with the whiskey that it was too much for them. So, but yeah, every culture figured out some way of fermenting sugar into something that made them happy. So in this case, Greenbriar was one of those things, but it's a lot of work. But
can you go over the asparagus thing
Okay. Okay, yeah. So the asparagus, that is the tips of the vines. So in this case, it looks like the tips are frost damaged and no good. But you would follow the vines. The bigger the vine, the bigger the asparagus. So like this one, I wouldn't bother with. But out in the deep woods where you find them the size of your finger, that is worth pulling down out of the tree. Because at the end there is going to be a nice chunk of asparagus. You can eat it raw. I really like George Foreman grill. So spray it with some olive oil, sprinkle it with some sea salt, and grill it for a few minutes, and then ooh, really, really good that way. Or holiday sauce. But basically, at least the thickness of a pencil. You know, number 2 pencil. You know, at least that thick. From that thick up to as big as you can get it is really, really good. Another nice thing is after the first 9 feet of the vine, the thorns stop. So there'll be thorns at the bottom, but once you get above 9 feet, the rest of the vine doesn't have thorns. It's because there's never been an herbivore in North America that could get above 9 feet. And so the plant realized it doesn't need to make thorns above 9 feet, so stop making those thorns. Plants are lazy. I'm a big fan of plants. If they don't have to expend energy on something, they won't. And so making thorns, it's only good against predators. It's a waste of energy for anything else. And so the vines that, for whatever mutation, stopped putting them at the ends, had a little more energy that they could devote to other plant things. And so they out reproduce the ones that put thorns all the way to the end. And so now we have the, basically the thorns stop at 9 feet. Hopefully when we get out in the woods, we'll find some bigger ones too.